Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free review of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. If you are new here to the podcast or watching on YouTube, where I post individual movie reviews, youtube.com/Mike Distro. You may not know that this is part of an entire podcast. So if you're just watching there, I highly recommend. Obviously, I have a bit of a bias here because I do the podcast, but every single week, Movie Mike's Movie Podcast comes out. So not only do we do a movie review, but we also talk about movie topics. We break down trailers. So if you're watching here or listening here, or you're not doing one of those, be sure to check out the podcast. Be sure to check out the YouTube channel. But maybe you're not that familiar with me and you think, oh, this is just some other movie critic on YouTube who gets paid by studios to review movies. Not the case whatsoever. I am just a guy who loves movies. I pay to watch every single movie that I review. Now, I do have Regal Unlimited, but nobody pays me for that. It's not an endorsement. Everything I go watch in theaters is because I want to see it personally, or I know it's going to be a big movie and I want to share my thoughts with you guys to let you know what is good and what is not good. But I don't have any pressures by any studios or anybody telling me, hey, go check out this movie and let us know what you think. Wink, wink. Not the case here. I don't even consider myself a really good movie critic because a lot of the things I break down are how movies make me feel. I'll always do spoiler-free reviews because if you stick to the ways that movies make you feel, you'll always give your truth and you'll never ruin things. So I get into very bare minimum of what the plot is about, but more about how the movie makes me feel and what type of person is going to enjoy this type of movie. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I wasn't that excited about going into watching Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And at the time of recording this, the movie has already been out for a couple weeks. By the time you hear this, it'll probably be in its third week. And I did not go see this movie on the first week of release. I didn't go to any press screening because I just wasn't that interested in it. And historically, the Ghostbusters movies have been some of the most iconic movies. I think it was just a little bit before my time. If you grew up in the 80s, were born in the early 80s, and these movies you associate with your childhood, I feel the fandom there. If you're a big Bill Murray fan, Dan Aykroyd fan, I can see why you would love these movies. You watched the cartoon as a kid, you had the toys, you dressed up like them for Halloween. I could see why you would be more passionate about these movies, but I never really was. And when Afterlife came out in 2021, I even refused to go see that one in theaters because I wasn't that interested in it. It felt like nostalgia bait to me. It felt like they were just cranking out these movies to say, hey, remember what we did back in the 80s? Let's make it cool again. But I rewatched that one a couple of weeks before this one came out. And I was like, you know what? Glad I gave this movie another chance because I actually think it's pretty fun. The way they reset the story with a family member who is the grandkid, one of the original Ghostbusters. You learn all about that in the first one. So you do need to watch Afterlife going into Frozen Empire because that one really sets the stage on all these characters. But I didn't watch that one the first time or the second time I rewatched it thinking, I cannot wait to watch this next one, Frozen Empire. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I was so surprised how much I ended up loving this movie. And I don't read reviews or watch reviews or listen to reviews going into a movie, but people just felt the need to tell me about this. The guy who scanned our tickets going into the movie said, oh, I heard mixed things. Looking at it now tends to be the temperature going into Frozen Empire. Some people loved it. Some people hated it. I think the people who hate it were those that I was talking about earlier who were a big fan of it back in the 80s, probably because they wanted to be like those original movies with more Dan Aykroyd, more Bill Murray, more of the original Ghostbusters, at least the ones that are still living, and be just that again. But if you got that again, it wouldn't be as successful as these are now. And the people who love it are buying into this new generation of Ghostbusters. Maybe you're a big Paul Rudd fan. Maybe you're a big Finn Wolfhard fan from Stranger Things. But I think the direction they decided to take this one is kind of marrying the two, because they tried to make Afterlife so different than the Ghostbusters. They put them out in Oklahoma. They really changed up the dynamic of the team and then kind of sprinkled in some of the old school stuff. And this one, they go back to New York. They're trying just to be everyday Ghostbusters. Of course, they're at the threat of getting shut down again. And then all these weird things start happening around the city. It's all tied to one object. And a new threat opposes the Ghostbusters, opposes the entire city of New York, and really the entire world at the risk of causing a second ice age, is basically what this movie's about. You see it a lot in the trailer. But what they were able to do in this one was make it so much warmer and inviting, and I really understand what they are trying to do here and can see why some people are upset. Because at the core of it, Ghostbusters was kind of always meant for kids. Even though the original ones, there are some very suggestive things in Ghostbusters 1 and Ghostbusters 2. There's not even just straight up innuendos, but just straight up sexual jokes. I think those movies would have a much different rating if they were to come out right now than they got back in the 80s. And maybe the filmmakers realize it now. So what they've decided to do and what this movie is more of a family movie. And it's one of the best family movies that you can go watch right now. There are some of the jokes that adults are going to get and maybe kids won't get. One of them even made the trailer, Bill Murray, referencing the villain in this movie as tall, dark, and horny, which he does have big horns, but obviously he's not talking about the horns when he's saying that. And that is just Bill Murray being Bill Murray and what you pay him millions of dollars to do. I love the way that everybody else takes a back seat who isn't McKenna Grace, who plays the granddaughter of Egon. So that is how they are keeping his legacy alive, because not only did he die in the franchise, he also sadly died in real life. And she becomes, even more so than Afterlife, the main character of this movie. It is her as a teenager wanting to be a part of the Ghostbusters, but them essentially having to bench her because the mayor of New York says if she continues to be a Ghostbuster and doing out all these things, she's going to end up in jail. So Paul Rudd, Finn, they all still do the Ghostbuster thing, and she is struggling to find her identity because this is what she wants to do. She's really smart, really into science, and ghost-busting is what she wants to do in her life. But to have that ripped away, to be going through all the normal teenage things, her story is the forefront of this. And I think it is such a great way to continue the legacy of Ghostbusters and to make it feel fresh, but also make it feel familiar with all the ghosts. You have Slimer back in this movie, and it really leans in more to all the fun supernatural elements that is Ghostbusters and what they are famous for, and really allows it to turn into a movie with some really great, pretty well-defined characters when it comes to a family film. And you also see Paul Rudd's character evolve a little bit more, of having to have a little bit more authority over these kids. One of them is 18 years old now, Finn, the older brother, and he is now not seen as a kid anymore, but yet he's trying to take on more responsibility, but yet still feels like a kid at heart. And any good movie is going to be about one thing. So yes, it is about them capturing and getting rid of ghosts. But a good movie is about one thing, but it has a theme underneath it. And the theme of Ghostbusters now is family and how they come together, work together, love each other. It's also a bit of an unconventional family. Paul Rudd is in that role of father figure, but he's not really their dad. So you have them actually going through things and feeling things. And me, myself, I was thinking, man, I wish a movie came out like this when I was just a teenager, because this easily would have been my favorite movie, combining some supernatural elements. Now, it's not overly scary. A part of me wanted this movie to come out during Halloween because it very much feels Halloween friendly to me. The level of horror or scariness that this movie has, which I really wouldn't describe it that way, but it kind of feels like the Scooby-Doo movie from the 2000s, where the monsters are a little bit creepy looking, and maybe if you're like a really young kid, maybe 6 and under, you get scared by it, but anything above that, I think you would not have nightmares after watching this film. What it does really well, and what some people maybe feel ripped off by, is it sprinkles in just a little bit all the other Ghostbusters, Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray. I mean, you have Ernie Hudson at 78 years old looking incredible. Dude is ripped. dude can still act. And comparing him to Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, who are still roughly around the same age, and really when you look at this cast, Paul Rudd is 54 years old and still looks like he's my age. He looks 32 like I do. I don't know what these people are doing in Hollywood. They probably have some secret potion. I don't want to say they have good doctors. I just think it's really good genes. But they all look phenomenal. The visual effects in this movie are a definite improvement from Afterlife. That one cost $75 million to make. They spent a little bit more here, $100 million. I feel like that really shows in the villain, who had a much more realistic look, wasn't as ghosty and cartoony as some of the other ghosts in the movie, or really in the entire franchise. Because when you go back to the very first and second Ghostbusters, the visual effects then were just so limited, and it greatly dates those movies. As beloved as they are, as much as they are classics, it is a much better time to be making these movies now with the technology we have. I think they still keep kind of some of those elements from the original movie just to kind of give it that look. I feel like the lion statues in this one, they probably could have made those look a little bit better, but it very much looked like that same kind of stop motion animation style that the original movie had. So I'm okay with that. I know they could probably make all these characters look just like 15% better and it would be more appealing to me, but then it would probably feel like less of a Ghostbusters movie. And overall, what really made me enjoy this movie is they are just a really good team. Everybody together, with the old Ghostbusters and the new Ghostbusters, all work together really well. Some really fun, well-defined characters that I wasn't expecting to feel so much of a bond to all of them. Rarely do I say, I wish a movie was a little bit longer, but in this case, where it was just around an hour and 45 minutes, I could have made it to the 2 hour mark. And I know the plan now is maybe not so much another sequel to this, which I would love, but they're going to do a Netflix show that is going to be animated. But while watching Frozen Empire, I was thinking I would love to see a Ghostbusters show, which I know they had the cartoon back in the day. But I think when it comes to Ghostbusters, if we had a series over another movie, I mean, give me one more of this, but then after that, turn it into a series, I think that would have a much better life. It would also probably expose a younger audience to it a little bit easier. And I just got to say, Paul Rudd is so incredibly charming. And I bet it's so cool for him, somebody who grew up in the 80s, to now be in a movie with Bill Murray, which I kind of thought Bill Murray was going to have a little bit more of a substantial role in this. At first, I was worried that his appearance was going to be a mere cameo. And what they say about working with Bill Murray is you never really know when he's going to show up. They would just be filming, he'd be on the call sheet, they'd wonder, is he going to show up or not? Sometimes he would. And it feels like once he gets there, you got to keep rolling. You got to let Bill do Bill. And what you see is what you get. I also think that's probably why they can't do a movie focusing on just those characters, because they don't know if Bill Murray is going to be there or not. But I also think it was a great time for this movie to come out 40 years after the original one, doing okay at the box office so far at the time of recording this. It has crossed the $100 million mark, which is good. But for a movie that also spent $100 million to make, generally you want to make at least 50%, but really 100% to be profitable. They did that with Afterlife, which is the reason we got this movie. I think eventually it could get there with the international box office, hopefully crossing that $200 million mark. Ooh, it's a struggle right now. I could easily see them getting to 175. So I think that number is going to be very telling on whether or not we get a third film in this franchise. I'd be pretty bummed out after really bonding with these characters. Kumail Nanjiani was a fantastic addition to the cast, and I think his character really showed how much they stepped up the writing in this movie, where it's a lot funnier than Afterlife. It's not like split your pants, laugh out loud funny. That was a good one. But the amount of jokes that they kept working in, and a lot of the situational humor and the fun little quick one-liners, I thought were so much better in this. And just so much more reminiscent and an ode to the original Ghostbusters. So the fact that the comedy was there on the page, it was met with great performances, stepped up the visual effects. There were so many things that I just loved about this movie, and it was also due to the fact that I was going into it not expecting to like it as much as I did. So, it's a movie that if you lower your expectations, change a little bit how you think about the Ghostbusters franchise, especially if you grew up with it, but if you were already a fan of Afterlife, you got to go see this one. I think for the big Ghostbusters fans, it is a must watch in theaters just because you get that feeling again. It is one that is fun to experience with other people. There was a big Ghostbusters fan sitting next to me who would cheer, curse along with the movie. He seemed to be having a really good time. Kelsey was sitting to my right, who watched the first one with me, not too familiar with the old school versions, but ended up also really enjoying this movie. But she also liked Afterlife. So if you like that one, if you like the original ones, definitely see this in theaters. If you didn't like Afterlife and are just hardcore about the original Ghostbusters, probably wait for it to come out on streaming. But I think it's a really fun time. Depending on the age that your kids are, I do think it is fine for kids. There is a little bit of language, like I mentioned what Bill Murray says earlier. There's also at least one S bomb that I remember that really stuck out. Maybe another one in there, but there's no F words. No real violence. It's all fantasy action based. But for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I was right on the line between a 4 and a 4.5. If this was a movie that didn't have any legacy attached to it, I think it would be a 4.5. But due to the fact that I don't even know that I would rate the original ones a 5 out of 5, I'm going to go a strong 4 out of 5 Slimers for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.